welcome to a brand new episode of the Cricket Paper podcast. Today, Mohan and myself will be completing our Ashes watch by discussing the bowling attacks for both England and Australia. We'll also begin to preview the white ball series against South Africa starting next week with a look at the squads that were announced a short while ago. But first, we'll begin with another recap of the 100 action. Not too much has happened from an individual player perspective since we last spoke, Mohan, but we did see the top three secure their places in the knockout stages. And last night, Oval Invincibles, all but in the final with their victory over London Spirit. And with players, as we've discussed already, Jordan Cox, Sam Curran, Will Jacks, they're all in form and seem to be performing every game, and certainly going to be tough to beat, aren't they?
Yeah, I think they're the team to beat. Two-time champions, current reigning champions as well. It's going to take a hell of an effort to topple them in the final. And I think, the top three teams that, since we've been covering the 100 over the last few weeks, the top three teams we expected to be there in this final round, they're the teams that have made it. It's going to be interesting to see if either Trent Rockets or Northern Superchargers, can topple Oval Invincibles. I think it's going to be it's going to take a really big team effort to do that. But yeah, it's the usual suspects again performing. I think I saw this morning an aggregate of sort of Sam Curran's tournament. This season, and he's batting, scoring runs at a good average and high strike rate, and he's also got I think 12 wickets as well. So I'd be surprised if England keep sort of ignoring him moving forward. I think he's maybe having a bit of a resurgence himself, maybe reinventing himself a little bit, and it'll be interesting to see how England handle him moving forward. But yeah, just focusing on the 100, I think Oval Invincibles they're going to be a tough team to beat, and if they end up being three-time champions, I don't think anyone will be too surprised by that.
Yeah, and they just seem such a really well-balanced side, obviously well led by Sam Billings, who's a very good captain in white ball cricket. Donovan Ferreira, sort of an example of the perfect overseas signing for sort of the role he plays at the end of an innings. And then even last night with Rashid Khan unavailable, you have sort of someone like Nathan Souter, sort of a dependable performer at county cricket, can step up and perform. Even with the ball, I mean, the bowling attack doesn't look sort of incredible on paper, but you've got the Curran brothers both perform with the ball as well, and Jason Behrendorff, a few question marks over that signing, but he's been a very smart addition as well. And yeah, they just look a very well-rounded team, and not a surprise really at all that it looks like they're going to finish top of the table, barring a dramatic net run rate swing in the coming days.
Yeah, and I know last week we were talking about sort of what makes some of these 100 teams more successful than the other. We were looking at Welsh Fire and London Spirit and why maybe they haven't fired in the last couple of seasons. And I think you outlined there perfectly why Oval Invincibles have been so good. Sort of just from 1 to 11, their domestic players, led, by Jordan Cox and also the Curran brothers, have been, consistent throughout the tournament. The overseas signings, even though they aren't sort of necessarily all the big names. Rashid Khan obviously is a big name, but they've all sort of stood up at various times. It's been a proper team performance throughout. And in these franchise competitions, that's sort of what ends up winning you competitions is just team efforts. If you rely too much on one player or a couple of signings, I think that's where teams fall short. But Oval Invincibles, again, for the third year running, showing sort of the value of playing as a team.
We saw the Trent Rockets secured their place in the top three with a victory at Welsh Fire. That was led by Joe Root, who saw them over the line with a half century. I mean, he hasn't had sort of the best tournament, but he's had two very good innings at the back end. And he's someone who, I mean, again, it's with sort of the Ashes on the horizon. It's not sort of a major conversation for now, but he's someone who, again, in sort of the T20 format for England, they've sort of moved on from him, but he's kind of reinvented himself as an opener. He's done it a bit in the SA20 franchise competition as well. I mean, that is just another option. I know there's a lot of names there in the hat for England to open the batting, but that just gives you another option there of, a class player like Joe Root could offer something for England in T20s going forward.
Yeah, and even in sort of 50 over cricket as well. I know for a while he fell out of favour in all of the white ball stuff, but he started coming back again in the 50 over stuff. And I think you make a good point. Joe Root is sort of so adaptable and so versatile that he can probably change his game to suit the needs of a team, even if that is a T20 side. I think just focusing on the 100, you mentioned for a lot of the tournament he was a bit quiet, but in his last 2 games, he's had 2 great knocks. And, sometimes in these franchise competitions, peaking at the right time is often a big thing. And, maybe him hitting his sort of best form of the tournament now isn't such a bad thing. But yeah, you're right. England have a lot of options in that sort of top 5, 6 in their limited over sides where they could pick any combination of players and it'll probably do a really good job. You're right. I am interested to see if they ever consider Joe Root again for T20s. I know, in his heyday in like 2016, I remember in that T20 World Cup in India, he played some really great knocks, showing that he could sort of expand his game and be more attacking. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they use him. I think if England ever do go back to him, it'll probably be in that top 3. I think, the later you leave it, I think England are better off focusing on their major power hitters. But, Joe Root being Joe Root, he can probably find a way of doing it for the team if he does get picked again. And even just his utility all around, some chipping in with some part-time spin as well might be useful. But you're right. I think with the Ashes coming up and the Test stuff being his main focus, it's probably not on his radar at the moment to make it back in the T20 team. But, if he ever does get picked again, I'm sure he'll do a great job.
It looks like, almost guaranteed we'll see Trent Rockets against Northern Superchargers in the Eliminator later in the week. There's obviously a few games to play out before that, but some interesting battles in there. Obviously, you've got sort of Joe Root against Harry Brook, Zach Crawley and Tom Banton at the top of the order. You've got overseas power hitters, Marcus Stoinis, David Miller, and obviously Ryan Ahmed against the more experienced spinners of Adil Rashid and now Sam Patel, who's joined the Superchargers. So some very interesting matchups, and as ever with a sort of 100 ball contest, a very difficult one to call.
Yeah, I think it was only when you really just rattled off all those names that you realise just how good those 2 sides are, and they're the ones that aren't first at the moment. So yeah, it's going to be hard to call. It's just going to be one of those things where on the day, whoever comes off, will probably end up getting their team over the line. I think there's so many good players there that you've mentioned, international level players as well, that there might be a little bit of sort of playing for bragging rights as well, because a lot of them obviously play together at England. It'll be interesting to see sort of how some of those contests go. But yeah, it's going to be a tough one to call. I think so many good matchups there. Who if you were a betting man, who would you put your money on in terms of the other finalists?
Yeah, I do fancy Trent Rockets. I thought at sort of the start of the campaign, I did sort of fancy him definitely for the top 3. I mean, it was very hard to look past the Oval Invincibles as it's played out. But yeah, I think the Trent Rockets look very strong. They recruited in the draft really well with sort of their all-rounder picks in Ryan Ahmed, David Willey, who's the new captain, and Marcus Stoinis, because you've got 3 sort of strong batters there, but also bowlers who can be in the top 5, 6. And then I think it meant that on Sunday against Welsh Fire, we had Sam Hain coming in at number 9 back in there, which is just ridiculous. So yeah, they've got a very strong team, and obviously Andy Flower a very good coach, franchise cricket as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I guess with sort of the shorter the format, the harder it is to call, because all it takes is sort of Harry Brook, or as we've seen with Zach Crawley, just play a magic innings. But yeah, I'd fancy the Trent Rockets. But what I would say is that it's good to see the Northern Superchargers in the top three, because they haven't been there before, and I think it's always good for a competition to see something a bit fresh. We obviously saw it with the Big Bash and the IPL having new winners this year, so it's almost like it's written for Northern Superchargers under Freddie Flintoff to go and win it. But yeah, so I think it's disappointing from the competition point of view that we've not had sort of anything really riding on these final round of games. But I think it would be very good for competition if we saw sort of a new name on the trophy.
I agree, and I think that's a really good point, because especially since the 100 is still relatively new in terms of as far as franchise competitions go, I think if the competition falls into that place where one team just every year seems to be so much stronger than the rest and they keep winning, it can sort of fans of the other teams and other sort of territories can maybe lose a bit of enthusiasm, because they know sort of year on year, unless the teams change drastically, that their sides may not have much of a chance. I think when a competition is still sort of in its infancy, I think having a few different winners can sort of just increase that enthusiasm and love across the country, and make this competition continue to grow and get bigger as time goes on. I know during the week or last week, I think I think on the Sky Sports Cricket podcast, Hussain and Atherton were talking about sort of the emotional connection with some of these franchises, and why at what point will fans really feel that. And I think, to your point, I think having a few different winners at various stages, I think might help with that, because different counties will start to feel like, okay, this year, we won it last year, let's do it again. But then another county who won it maybe 2 years prior will feel like, oh, it's time to reclaim our rightful place. And I think that can create quite a nice internal competition as well. So yeah, I agree with you. I think it would be nice to have a new winner after a couple of years.
And just to point on sort of the teams that have struggled again, I know we touched on it last week with London Spirit and Welsh Fire, but I was watching the Manchester Originals against Birmingham Phoenix the other day, and a very difficult surface to bat on. The ball was it was very much a spin friendly pitch, and I think they only scored 109 off their 100 balls, and it just makes you wonder when you see sort of the teams that are in the top three, and the sort of the three grounds they play at: the Oval, Trent Bridge, Headingley. Very good batting grounds, and then you see sort of Lords, Cardiff. A big thing's always made about the dimension of the ground at Cardiff. Obviously, Manchester, where it's very spin friendly. You just wonder how much the grounds actually do play a part in sort of how the franchises have performed over the years.
Yeah, and it's like a catch-22, because I think watchability can sometimes be improved when you do have these odd low-scoring games. But I think the key is when it's infrequent, as opposed to happening all the time. And if you are a county or a franchise that happens to play at a ground which routinely churns up these low-scoring affairs, then I think you're right. It does sort of, I think they'll feel quite aggrieved that they're always playing on those kind of surfaces, while there's some of the teams you mentioned there that play at the Oval, for example, play on batting paradises. So it's an interesting one. Like I say, I personally, just as a spectator, I don't mind seeing these spin-friendly wickets on occasion. But I agree that if it's too frequent, as a team, you probably do feel like, is there any danger of maybe preparing a wicket that does help our batters a little bit more? But do you have any strong thoughts either way on sort of going forward if curators should maybe try and either uniformly make things sort of batting friendly or, try and make things even a bit more bowler friendly across the board?
Yeah, it is a tough balance. 'Cause I think almost the shorter format you get, you're almost favouring the batters. I mean, that's kind of what it's built to. You want that entertainment of, loads of sixes, high scoring games. But yeah, you want to find that balance. I saw the Invincibles scored sort of 220, the record score not long ago. But then when you see teams sort of scratching around a run a ball, just over run a ball, yeah, as you say, in isolation, they both can be entertaining to watch. But yeah, it's just about finding that balance, really. I think it also helps when you look at the Oval Invincibles, look at the core of that squad. I mean, there are a lot of Surrey players in that team, which obviously helps. I think with the home ground. I think when you look at like the Welsh Fire, there's the young lad Ben Kellaway, who's only come in for the last few games. He's the only Glamorgan player who's played. I think Mason Crane's also in the squad, but I don't think he's played. So you're bringing in a whole new squad of players who, apart from maybe once a year in the T20 Blast, don't really play at Cardiff much at all. So I think it is difficult in such a short competition. And I think that is obviously Oval Invincibles a very strong side as well. So that's not the only reason, but I think that certainly is a beneficial factor for them. But yeah, in terms of pitches, you just want to find that balance, don't you? Really, I think we have slowly seen as competition has gone on, some high scoring. At the start of the tournament again, it seems like teams have still struggled a little bit to adapt to this new format. I don't think it's produced consistently the high scores that I think perhaps a lot of people are expecting. I think as this competition has gone on, you have started to see more regular scores in that kind of 150, 160 region, which is good to see. But we'll move on from the 100 now. Obviously, there's 3 more group games to play, and then over the weekend will be the eliminator and the final. So we'll see who wins the 5th edition of the 100 later this week. But we'll move on to England now, because they're back in action next week against South Africa in a ODI and T20 series. And they also, following that, head over to Ireland for 3 T20s as well. And they announced their squad around a week ago or so. So we'll just have a look through that now. And I think the one thing that we want to talk about was the main headline really was for the Ireland series, where they've rested some of the all-format players, and Jacob Bethell has been named captain, the youngest England captain. And just wanted your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, for Jacob himself, I think it's a huge honour, and I'm sure he's thrilled with it. And I think as a young player, when you get sort of bestowed that responsibility and that title, you kind of know in the back of your mind that I'm sort of a player that, they believe in, that the management believe in, and they sort of see a future with me sort of playing a key role. But I guess just, taking a step back and looking at it, there's been some conversation as to whether it's maybe a little bit premature, just given, he is so young, which in itself isn't a bad thing. We've seen some captains in the past get given, that title very early. Graham Smith, obviously, famously was given it very young. But I think it's more the fact that he's still sort of finding his feet at international cricket. I mean, you could even argue he's still finding his feet at just county level. You know, he hasn't scored a county, a first class 100 yet, and you know he's still sort of figuring out his game, and so then to be given sort of this captaincy, and yeah, you know, you could say it's a series against Ireland, which, like you mentioned, a lot of the all format sort of big dogs are rested, and so you know they need someone to be captain. But you know, I think the fact that Jacob Bethell is the man that they've turned to is quite interesting, because it does suggest that they see him potentially having future leadership responsibilities, even against sort of some of the bigger nations. And it's more just a case of balancing all this expectation that's been on Bethell since since last summer, really, when he was first kind of floating around the various squads and playing some of the white ball stuff. Sort of it's balancing that expectation with the fact that he, you know, hasn't played a ton. So, you know, are we running the risk of overburdening or burdening him just sort of too early? You know, in the interview he gave, where, you know, upon receiving this, receiving the captaincy, he seemed sort of at ease with it and seemed sort of happy to take it on. But, you know, well, again, time will tell if this is something that will be a long-term thing, or whether it was just a one-off. But I personally feel that it's maybe a little bit premature. I would like to first see him regularly sort of cement his place in the various squads, you know, establish himself as a batter, or in limited overs, establish himself as whatever the England team sort of see him as, whether it's, you know, a batting all-rounder or a fully fledged all-rounder, and maybe, you know, in time, maybe in a few years, maybe turn to him as sort of a captain. But you know, it's a great honour at the end of the day, and we'll just have to see how it all pans out. But what were your initial thoughts when he was announced as captain?
Yeah, it does seem. I mean, we're only talking about sort of 3 T20 matches here, but it does seem a bit of an unnecessary pressure at this stage of his career. He obviously he only came in for that final test against India, and although you can't really judge him on that, I think he got a bit of stick for how he struggled with that, and then he's not had the best 100 competition, so he's under.
Yeah,
I wouldn't say he's not under pressure, but you know he'll be wanting to get back to showing everyone what he can do. So it does seem, yeah, like I say, a bit of unnecessary pressure perhaps. There's Phil Salt there, who's been captain during the 100 and obviously got loads of IPL experience. But yeah, it's only sort of 3 T20s. But what I would say as well for sort of Harry Brook, he's only a new captain, and all the focus is on the Ashes. But the T20 World Cup is pretty much immediately after, sort of February time. You would have thought for a new captain that he would have. I know it's important to not overplay him too much in the build-up, but you'd have thought he would have wanted to have been involved really in every match in the build-up to an ICC tournament, really.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Because I guess for Harry Brook, his first major sort of leadership role is the white ball stuff, and his first test is going to be that T20 World Cup. Really, his big first test. So I agree. I think I'm surprised that he specifically is not playing, because again, you make a good point. It is only a handful of T20s against Ireland, but I guess, you know, the opportunity to play T20s for the national side is quite sort of infrequent, really. It's mainly franchise stuff. So ahead of a World Cup, if you can sort of play together as much as you can wherever possible and build sort of that rapport and sort of an identity as a side, and, you know, establish some kind of roles and responsibilities, I think I personally would have thought that was an important thing to consider. So yeah, I'm with you on that. I'm quite surprised that Harry Brook sort of isn't playing in that series, but you know, I guess that is the way of the sort of the modern landscape, is you sort of play whatever you need to play and then sort of turn up ahead of the World Cup, and usually things work out for the most part. And you know, when they don't work out, we'll probably do a podcast where we criticize whether players should have played leading up to it. But I guess that's just the way cricket world works now.
And before Ireland, they, as mentioned, faced South Africa at home in 3 ODIs, 3 T20s. There'll be a couple of things to sort of watch out for there. Will Jamie Smith continue to open? Will Rehan Ahmed get his opportunity that he's definitely deserved with his form in recent months, and whereabouts does he fit in that middle order? So yeah, just your thoughts, Rehan Ahmed. I imagine you're in the same boat, that he certainly deserves his opportunity.
Yeah. It's I guess I think we mentioned a couple of weeks ago, sort of wrist spinners in general are exciting, and then when you have a wrist spinner that can bat as well as he does, it's just like this whole new dynamic to a side that very few teams have. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to the fact that he's been picked is super exciting. I'm hoping that he does actually get a chance to play in the final 11s. And how they use him will be interesting. I know he's batting a lot in the top order these days for various teams, but you've made a good point already that England have so many players to choose from for that top sort of 4 already. So it's going to be interesting to see how they utilize him, sort of whether he bats sort of alongside someone like a Jacob Bethell in that sort of middle order. It's going to be interesting to see how he goes, and sort of the role that he adopts in the side, and whether it'll end up being sort of a long-term thing as well. Because if he makes a good impression, if he does get picked in the playing 11s and he makes a good impression, I think he has potentially a huge role to play in the T20 World Cup. Because correct me if I'm wrong, that's in India and Sri Lanka, right?
Yeah.
The next T20 World Cup. Yeah, so wrist spins, a spinner that can bat well. I think that could be huge potentially in those conditions. So yeah, I hope sort of he has a good outing if he gets his chance. And yeah, I'm going to be watching with interest for sure.
And just looking at sort of the pace tap for the ODI series to begin with, we have Jofra Archer, Sonny Baker, Bryden Carr, Saqib Mahmood, and Jamie Overton. An interesting pace tap there. You've got Jofra Archer, who's got a lot of games under his belt now. It's good to see him involved in the squads. But obviously, they're going to be careful with him. Sonny Baker, who's obviously impressed 100. Interested if he gets the opportunity to play. Bryden Carr, who's obviously missed 100 through injury. Saqib Mahmood, who's been sort of England's, one of England's frontline white ball bowlers in recent times. And then Jamie Overton, who you'd say it's quite a big series for him to sort of prove himself with bat and ball. So an interesting pace out there, and see how they get on.
Yeah, it's an opportunity for pretty much everyone. I mean, even Jofra Archer, even though he is established as an international player, he's obviously coming back after a long layoff and it's still kind of easing into various forms of cricket. So it's interesting to see sort of how he goes for one. But yeah, the likes of Sonny Baker, Jamie Overton, it's great opportunities for them. The only thing when you read those names out is that there's, other than maybe Jofra Archer, who bowls at high pace, there's the potential for the attack to have a sort of samey feel about it. They're all sort of right-arm seamers. Probably, when they're on form, operating in that sort of 85 miles per hour mark, which, if you bowl well, I don't think that matters too much, but there is the potential for that kind of attack to kind of feel a bit samey to the opposition. So it'll be interesting to see if that has any sort of, pros and cons sort of throughout the series. But it's a great opportunity for all of them. And I know everyone's very keen to see how Sonny Baker goes, because his sort of rise to the top has been quite stark. So yeah, another one along with Rehan Ahmed that I'm going to be looking forward to for sure.
Yeah, it should be an entertaining series. South Africa, they've just won an ODI series in Australia 2-1. They've got a lot of young talent in their side as well, especially with the bat. So should make for a good test and a very exciting series. But we'll move on now to finish our Ashes watch. Obviously cover the top order and the middle order for both sides. So we'll look at the bowling attacks. We'll start with Australia because there's not really too much to discuss here because it's a very formidable bowling attack, and it's just a case of you've got four very good seamers that you've got to fit into three.
Yeah, and I guess it's a great problem to have, as they say. I think with Australia, barring any kind of freak injury that might happen, I think everyone knows what you're going to get from that attack. Sort of they're relentless, even though they're going to be hitting line and length throughout all 5 days of all 5 tests. It's still a challenge when they execute that skill so well. They have pace, they have variety. Stark offers something different, obviously. The only question mark that sort of people keep mentioning coming into the series is that some of them are getting on in age. Mainly Stark and Nathan Lyon. And sort of Hazelwood has had, of all of them, I think Hazelwood has probably had relatively more injury issues on and off, but he seems to be fitter and stronger now at the moment. But going into the series, based on what we know and what we've seen them do, I think, England are going to have to bat really well against that attack to sort of be successful across 5 full tests. Because this attack, they're great when they're on top, but they also have this amazing ability to bounce back when, if they do find themselves behind the 8 ball. Often we've seen Cummins sort of break open games when things seem to be going in the opposition's favor. So it's all those little things that make a big difference. And the biggest thing for me, which I think I'll touch on when we discuss England's attack, well, it's sort of their bowling fitness. And, I'll talk about that more when we discuss England. But I think, you mentioned it, Australia just, what you're going to get. And in my opinion, I think they're still the best all-round bowling attack in the world. So,
yeah, I guess sort of Scott Boland is only sort of come into the group in I think it was the last Ashes series in Australia when he took like 6 or 7.
6 or 7 or something, yeah.
Yeah, crazy. He's probably been one of the most unluckiest bowlers in recent years. He averages, he's taken 62 wickets in 14 tests, an average of 16 and a half, economy of 2.7. But you would think he will possibly begin as the reserve bowler if Cummins, Stark, and Hazelwood are all fully fit. And then obviously got Nathan Lyon, the best spin bowler in Test cricket. I guess the only sort of concern for Australia is that depth, which I think will be more of an issue moving forward in years to come. There doesn't seem to be too many young pace bowlers who are sort of in and around the group at the moment. It's obviously been Jai Richardson's been around for years, but he's had a lot of injury problems. So that would be difficult for them sort of moving forward, how integrating. They'll sort of go through a period, I think that England are going through, aren't they, where, new bowlers come into the side and it might take a bit of time. But they've, I think a positive for Australia is they've not seemed to have the issues England have had fitness-wise. These, like you say, Hazelwood's had a couple of niggles here and there, but in general they seem to be they seem to play regularly together, which hasn't been the case for England. If we discuss England now, obviously we won't have James Anderson or Stuart Broad going to Australia, but we do have a pace attack that if they're all fully fit, and that's a big if, certainly a very exciting attack that can cause Australia problems. Whether they'll be able to consistently take 20 wickets is another question, but certainly a very exciting pace attack on paper.
Yeah, and I think it was a few weeks ago when, and you mentioned James Anderson and Stuart Broad there. I think it was a few weeks ago where we were talking about, why England's bowlers maybe in the past weren't so penetrative, in Australia. And as much as sort of James Anderson, for example, was economical and bowled tightly, I think, he wasn't necessarily the most wicket taking. Broad had his moments, but as a collective, I don't think England always had that wicket taking potential, despite having some class bowlers who could keep things tight. I think this time as you mentioned, on paper, England have sort of 5, 6, 7 bowlers potentially to choose from who, they may not be the most economical, but they have shown in various matches and various sort of sightings that we've had of them that they can take wickets. From Archer to Wood, who we know more about, but Josh Tongue recently, Bryden Cass has had moments where he's picked up wickets. Gus Atkinson has had a great start to his career, much like Scott Boland. He's a small sample size, but he's been impactful when he has played. I think all those things are really great, and it's something that an England side really haven't had in a long time, I would say, in my opinion. Going to Australia. And on paper, if you were to pick a first-choice bowling attack, or if I were to pick a first-choice bowling attack, I think Jofra Archer, Wood, Gus Atkinson, and Ben Stokes would be sort of the four seamers I rely on. But you made it, we were talking about Australia's bowling fitness. I think the issue for me, the biggest thing that's going to be the difference between these two sides is how all these bowlers progress as the 5 tests go on. If you were to ask me, do I see Mitchell Starc, Pat Cummins, Nathan Lyon, those 3 in particular, playing at least 3 tests of the series, I would say 100%, barring any freak injury. Do I see them playing 4 tests? There's a very good chance they will. And do I see them playing all 5? I would say there's a decent chance they will.
Yeah.
Add to that, if Hazelwood has a good outing and his body stays fit, he can play the majority. But even if they have to swap in Boland, I think Boland has not really had too many injury issues so far. Whereas if I ask the same questions about the England attack, as good, as penetrative as they might be on paper, do I see Jofra Archer, Mark Wood, Ben Stokes, in particular, those 3, bowling at full capacity for 3 tests, like together? I would say it's unlikely that those 3 will. And I know England historically have had a bit of a strange relationship with sort of rest and rotation policies. They often like to preemptively maybe rest a bowler to avoid them potentially entering sort of the red zone in terms of their fitness and maybe dropping them prematurely, whereas Australia seem to sort of just play them until they finally do break down and then they rest them, which, maybe that will change this Ashes, I don't know. But do I see those 3 bowlers playing 4 tests? I definitely not. And I think that's why in a 5-test series, if things start to get a bit close in those crucial moments where it's sort of in the balance, Australia may still be able to turn to their big names, their big players at those crucial junctures. Whereas England, if they do lose Archer and or Wood, and maybe Stokes picks up a niggle again, potentially, God forbid he doesn't, but if he does pick up a niggle and he can't bowl, because we've seen throughout the summer how he can sort of turn games when things are not really happening, then that becomes a bit of an issue. And even someone like Gus Atkinson, we've spoken in the past about how, in his first spells and second spells, he might be very impactful, but, when he's had to sort of come back for a third spell, fourth spell, the second test, the third test, we've often seen his pace sort of drop. And so if that happens again, does that become an issue? And then if England have to sort of dip into their next sort of string of bowlers, how will they go sort of in those situations? So for me, I think that's going to be a huge point in this series, because on paper, England's first choice attack could cause real problems. And I think, we should make that clear, especially given Australia's top order are a little bit sort of uncertain at the moment. But if by the 3rd test, England have had to make some sort of forced changes, that's where I think the problems might start to creep in. But, we'll have to wait and see, because there's every chance maybe they will somehow stay fit. But if they don't, I think that's where Australia, gain the edge again in that bowling attack.
Yeah, I think Mark Wood will be the interesting one, because Jofra Archer's obviously had a lot of summer of cricket behind him now. So he seems, touch wood at this moment, he'll be good to go. But obviously Mark Wood, won't have played all year, or since the Champions Trophy, was it in February?
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see, if they do sort of map out beforehand, almost a bit what India did with Jasprit
Yeah.
Bumrah, whether they map out what tests they'll play, or if they just, unleash them all at Perth for that first test.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see who will be, the reserve bowlers. Obviously we'll have Josh Tong. They seem to have moved on from Matthew Potts. Whether they'll want a new ball bowler in Chris Wokes, obviously, if he's fit, that's
Yeah.
a big if. Or if they trust Sam Cook to take him, especially for that sort of pink ball test. And then there's Jamie Overton, who the England setup seem big fans of, or if they go for a wild card in Sonny Baker or even Josh Hull for that sort of left arm, a tall left armer.
Yeah.
For variety, I guess. Another big decision for England is the spin department, where Australia are sort of obviously very settled with Nathan Lyon. England, do you suspect will just go back to Shoaib Bashir?
I mean, the way Ben Stokes has been speaking, it sounds as though it's Shoaib Bashir that will just come straight back in. And even Ricky Ponting, I think, gave his blessing, saying that there are some similarities between Bashir and Lyon, probably physical attributes-wise, that, they're both tall and get overspin and so on. So, it sounds like Shoaib Bashir will come back in. I think England's relationship with spin in Australia, I think, is going to be again another big talking point, because it really depends on what they want from their spinner. Because I think we mentioned this again on a few podcasts ago. If they're looking for maybe just potentially wicket taking potential, even if it's at the cost of runs, like if it involves buying a couple of wickets, Bashir might be the guy to go for. Ally that with sort of Stokes's captaincy and inventive fields, something that, in the past when Joe Root was captain, for example, he seemed quite a reluctant captain of spin and sort of at times was a bit passive in sort of the fields that he set, whereas Stokes seems very much like, I will use spin to get a wicket, which is, quite an un-English thing, especially since Swan has retired. We haven't really seen that much with an England spinner. So the way Stokes uses him and captains Bashir, I think maybe we will see the best of Bashir, even though he hasn't been the most consistent or the most economical. But if as the series goes on, if England feel like they just need a bowler to tie up and enter their prized possessions, which are the paces, the 4, 5, 6 of them that they've picked, and sort of they've been sort of leading up to the series with sort of pace in mind. If that's their outlook, then maybe they'll want someone like Liam Dawson, who can be trusted to just tie up an end and offer some runs when it comes time to batting. So it kind of depends on how they view that position, that spinner's position. But from everything we hear, it sounds like Shoaib Bashir will come back in, because it sounds like from a year ago they were eyeing up Bashir for not only that India series when he made his debut, but also in Australia with the bounce that he could get. So, I think it does depend on how they view the spin and what they want from that position. But if you were in charge, who would be your first choice pick out of Bashir and Dawson?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. Dawson only got that sort of one test at Old Trafford to prove himself. Didn't bowl badly by any means, but perhaps didn't get the reward he would have hoped for. Yeah, it's a difficult one. I mean, there's even the temptation just to go with another seamer, if you trust sort of Joe Root to be the spinner, but that is a big risk. I feel that you do really need a frontline spinner in Australia. There's a few options as well. There's also Jack Leach. Sort of similar to Matthew Potts. He just seems to have dropped down the pecking order now. Tom Hartley, another left arm spinner, who did well in the last tour to India, but then hasn't been seen since in the Test squad. Even Rayan Ahmed, again, that's a big ask. Sort of play him as your frontline spinner. So there are options there. I would mean, I would lean towards Liam Dawson purely because he offers something with the bat as well. But they see something in Show Bashir, and I'd love nothing more for him to play and do well. I guess for him, he won't really have any more opportunity to showcase himself, whereas a lot of the others will be playing in the upcoming White Ball series, which could influence their decision. But yeah, no, I agree. I think they will stick with Bashir. I feel like they've invested, sort of similar to sort of Zach Crawley and Ollie Pope at the top of the order.
Yeah,
They've invested a lot of time in them. He played first few games of the India series, so yeah, I believe they will stick with Bashir, but there are options there. It'll be interesting to see where they go with that. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you once again, Mohan, for your contribution.
Pleasure as always, Dom. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for listening. And remember to please subscribe to the Cricket Paper.